What we did was to go through a process where more or less a rhetorical or theoretical question was asked of each department, and that is, at various levels, what would your department look like? What would its expenditures look like? What would its ability to serve its clients and the community look like if we were to take cuts? So specifically, we asked for cuts at a 2% level, at a 4% level, and at a 5% level. Actually, several departments offered cuts at higher levels than that. What we did was we actually reviewed each and every one of those cuts as if they were recommendations rather than as if they were very reluctant to provide those, and they were recommendations. So so as we mixed and matched, realizing what the priorities of the community might be, where the priorities of the city council might be, what you found was that we had no reductions in some departments and reductions greater than 5% in others. So we didn't just take it across the board. We tried to actually match our own anticipation of the community's reaction to certain cuts, especially if they affected direct services on the ground, in the street, in the field, in the parks, to our community. The number of positions for the city as a whole was 16 and a half. Of those positions, 11 were filled. And those are real folks who basically lost their jobs. And that's very hard on everybody, hardest obviously on the person losing their job. But it has been a long time since Arvada has had to do that. That said, 11 of the positions, not all filled, were in the general fund, which is where most of us feel like we get our governmental services. Another 5 and a half were in the utility funds, specifically water and wastewater. One might say, well, those are fee-based and it's user pays. Why did you get focused there? And the answer to that would be, well, in each case, a large part of the costs to our customers and the cost to the city and the city's utility department is driven by, in the case of water, the Denver Water Department, because 75% of our water supplies come from them. And they raise their rates to us 9.5%. Similarly, the Metro Wastewater Reclamation District is the collector and the treatment facility for all of the city's wastewater. And so, and they passed along a 7% increase. To try to reduce those cost increases to our customers, we undertook our own efficiencies and cuts in those two departments. And so we were able to reduce the impact on the ratepayer in water to 3.2% and the impact on the wastewater customer to 3.5%. Frankly, if we take a look at our reserves, particularly this undesignated 7.3 million roughly, if we're willing to make this decision and assume that our budgeted reserves are enough, then it would be an absolutely excellent time to get into the market to upgrade our maintenance of our basic facilities and to work on the backlog of capital projects the city has, because the bidding environment is so good. Now, that's not necessarily good for the private sector, but to the extent that we can take advantage of that and actually put people to work, it kind of acts as Arvada's own little stimulus project, if you were. We intend to upgrade our street resurfacing program. We intend to upgrade our parks maintenance program, and frankly, that will be a fairly significant change for a lot of folks because we're so far behind. So as an example, this last year, we resurfaced almost all the tennis courts in Arvada, and they were in pretty poor condition. So that was a pretty significant change for a certain limited part of the population, which isn't necessarily always tennis players. Skateboarders like those tennis courts too. Right now, I would say that the answer to that question lies more in what we're not funding looking forward, because we don't have the revenue to put into a savings account for certain projects. So as an example, we do know that we need to provide for the coming of light rail fast tracks to Arvada. We have 3 stations at Sheridan, in Old Town, and then at Kipling in the Arvada Ridge Marketplace area. And so, and each of those stations will be provided for in very basic architectural structures by RTD. Any enhancements by any community that are community specific have to be paid for by the community. Also, we will need to make accommodations for walkability and bike accessibility to the stations. Also for car accessibility to the stations. And finally, we're going to have to solve what we could expect to be parking issues around these stations. So one could expect that all of that, mostly not the architectural improvements, but mostly the infrastructure for accessibility is probably going to cost in the millions of dollars. The other issue is that each community is expected to contribute to the line at the rate of 2.5%. And there's a formula, and I'll be oversimplifying, but basically 2.5% of the cost of construction that occurs within that community. So for the Gold Line, Denver has some, Adams County has some, Arvada has some, Wheat Ridge has some. And our number is probably in the vicinity of $5 million. We have none of that set aside. But again, it's a number which we don't have to really worry about until roughly 2014 or 15, because the line is going to open in 16. Lakewood, for example, in building the West Line, was able to work out a structured deal with RTD that they will pay them over time. Now, I think it's about 3 years. So we wouldn't need to necessarily come up with that $5 million all at once. For the purposes of the departments, we told them that what they offer up, they should consider permanent. But here's our definition of permanent. We said permanent means that you should anticipate that you would not see a return of this money in part or in whole for probably 4 to 5 years. That's a fairly pessimistic view of the economy. Whether or not it's realistic is, every person's judgment to make.